Ohio's vanishing room legend turned out to be a crime scene. In the quiet, rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, where the trees grow thick and the fog clings to the valley long after sunrise, there stands an old farmhouse just off State Route 327 near the unincorporated community of Gloucester. The structure, weathered by decades of wind and rain, has stood vacant since the late 1980s, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of time. Locals have long avoided it, not out of mere disrepair, but because of a story whispered in hushed tones at county fairs and over coffee at roadside diners. They call it the Vanishing Room, a place said to swallow people whole, never to be seen again. For years, it was dismissed as folklore, a ghost tale spun to scare children from wandering too far into the woods. But in the autumn of 2017, when a young man named Thaddeus Mallory disappeared without a trace, the legend took a chilling turn, because what investigators found behind those crumbling walls wasn't a myth, it was a crime scene. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was on a crisp morning in early October, the kind where the air smells faintly of damp leaves and wood smoke curls from distant chimneys, that Sheriff Elias Crane received the call. A missing person report had been filed by the elderly aunt of Thaddeus Mallory, a 23-year-old aspiring photographer from Athens, Ohio. Thaddeus had told her he was going to explore some abandoned properties for a photo series titled Forgotten Corners. His last known message, sent via text at 6:47 in the evening on October 3rd, read, "Found something strange at the Gloucester house. The back room doesn't match the floor plan. Walls feel wrong." Then, silence. Sheriff Crane, a man with 31 years on the force and a face lined by both sun and sorrow, knew the Gloucester house by reputation only. He'd heard the stories of hikers who claimed they entered the house and exited miles away, of teenagers who swore they saw a door where none should be, opening into a space that defied logic. But he was a practical man, grounded in evidence, not superstition. Still, when no sign of Thaddeus turned up after 2 days, not at his apartment, not at his favorite diner, not even on surveillance footage from the gas station on Route 59, he ordered a search of the property. The team arrived just after dawn on October 6th, their breath visible in the pale light. The house loomed ahead, surrounded by knee-high weeds and rusted farm equipment half swallowed by the earth. Deputy Marlowe, a rookie with nerves tighter than a snare drum, led the way, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. The front door groaned open with a sound like a dying animal, releasing a wave of cold, stale air that carried the scent of mildew and something sharper, something metallic. Inside, the house was eerily intact. Dust coated every surface, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken furniture, no struggle. It was as if time had simply stopped. Photographs still hung crooked on the walls, a calendar from 1986 frozen on the month of July. Sheriff Crane moved through the kitchen, then the parlor, calling out Thaddeus's name, his voice echoing through the hollow rooms. Nothing answered. Then they reached the hallway. It was here that things began to feel off. The corridor seemed longer than it should have been, stretching farther than the exterior walls allowed. The floorboards creaked unevenly, and the wallpaper, once floral, now peeling in long strips, pulsed faintly in the draft, as though breathing. Deputy Marlowe paused, turning to the sheriff. "Sir, did we pass that door before?" he asked, pointing to a narrow paneled entrance on the left. Crane frowned. He didn't remember it. They opened it. Beyond lay a small room no more than 10 feet by 12, but everything about it felt unnatural. The ceiling sloped downward at an impossible angle, though the house outside had a flat roof. The walls were covered in crude symbols, drawn in what later tests would confirm as human blood, layered over decades. And in the center of the floor, a circle had been etched into the wood, filled with ash and bone fragments. Most disturbing of all, the room had no window, yet a faint greenish light seemed to emanate from the corners, flickering like old television static. Sheriff Crane's radio crackled. "We've got movement on thermal," came the voice of Officer Lyle, stationed outside. "2 figures, inside the house. One near the back hall. The other, sir. The second heat signature is coming from inside the west wall." Crane turned slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. There was no west wall in this room, it faced north. His pulse quickened. He stepped toward the northern wall, pressing his palm against the plaster. It gave slightly, like soft clay. He pushed harder, and his hand sank through. He yanked it back with a gasp. The hole sealed itself instantly, leaving no mark. "This isn't possible," Marlowe whispered, backing away. "This isn't real." But it was real. And worse, it was occupied. Later analysis would reveal traces of DMT and other hallucinogenic compounds in the air, suggesting someone had been burning psychoactive substances to induce altered states. But forensic teams also uncovered human remains buried beneath the floorboards, 3 sets of bones, carbon dated to the 1970s, 80s, and early 2000s. Dental records confirmed one belonged to a woman named Elspeth Vorn, reported missing in 1979 after telling friends she was investigating a doorway to another place in rural Ohio. And then there was Thaddeus. On October 9th, during a second sweep of the property, K-9 Unit Officer Renata Cho discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a collapsed section of the basement. Behind it, a narrow tunnel descended into darkness. The walls were lined with photographs, dozens of them taken inside the vanishing room. Faces stared out from the images, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Among them was Thaddeus, captured mid-stride, unaware, seconds before vanishing from the known world. At the end of the tunnel, they found him, not alive. Not exactly. His body was seated upright, propped against the stone wall, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn the night he disappeared. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were open, pupils dilated, fixed on a point beyond the ceiling. In his lap lay a leather-bound journal filled with frantic handwriting, sketches of shifting corridors, spiraling staircases leading nowhere, and repeated phrases, "It watches, it learns. It remembers names." The final entry, dated October 4th, just one day after his last text read, "I think I'm still here. I think I never left, but something else is wearing my face now. If you find this, don't go back, don't look for the door, it knows you're looking, it's always listening." The case was officially closed in March of 2018. Authorities cited homicide, though no suspect was ever identified. The house was condemned and scheduled for demolition, but crews refused to touch it. Dynamite placed at the foundation failed to detonate. Bulldozers stalled mid-approach, engines dead despite full tanks. Eventually, the state erected a chain-link fence around the property, topped with barbed wire, and posted warning signs, "No trespassing, hazardous structure." Yet, even now, nearly 7 years later, locals report seeing lights in the windows on foggy nights. Hunters claim to hear whispers drifting through the trees, voices calling names of people who've never been to Gloucester. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, residents swear they feel a pressure behind their eyes, a sensation of being pulled not forward, but sideways, into a space that shouldn't exist. The vanishing room, it seems, is not done, and perhaps it never will be. Because legends don't die in places like Ohio. They wait, they breathe, they grow hungry. And they remember. Thaddeus Mallory was not the first. He certainly won't be the last. So the next time you drive down a lonely road, past a house that looks just a little too still, a little too quiet, ask yourself, does the layout make sense? Do the doors line up? And when you pass by, do you feel, just for a second, as though the air has thickened and something on the other side of the wall has noticed you? Be careful. Some rooms don't let go. Some doors only open one way. And some houses, like the one near Gloucester, standing sentinel in the mist, don't just hold secrets, they feed on them. The investigation remained open for months, though leads dried up faster than puddles in summer heat. Psychologists analyzed Thaddeus's journal, concluding he likely suffered a psychotic break induced by toxins or isolation. Skeptics pointed to mold, carbon monoxide, or underground gas leaks as explanations for the hallucinations, but none could explain the photos. None could explain how his body appeared untouched by decay, preserved in a state that defied medical understanding. And no scientist could replicate the phenomenon of the shifting walls, the impossible geometry, the way the room seemed to exist outside normal dimensions. Dr. Corvin Hexton, a parapsychologist from Case Western Reserve University, visited the site in May of 2018. He brought with him electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and a team of graduate students. They spent 3 days collecting data. On the evening of the third day, Hexton entered the vanishing room alone, determined to meditate and record any anomalies. He never came out. Search parties combed the area for weeks. His equipment was found scattered near the basement entrance, cameras smashed, notebooks burned, audio recorders filled with static, and, at one point, a whisper in Hexton's voice, "It showed me the others." They're still walking. They don't know they're dead. After that, the state declared the property off-limits indefinitely. The fence was reinforced, motion sensors installed, helicopter flyovers increased. But still, the stories persist. In 2022, a drone operated by a storm chaser caught footage of the house during a thunderstorm. In one frame, clear, undeniable, the back door opens. A figure steps out. Tall, thin, wearing a coat that flaps in a wind no one else feels. The face is blurred, distorted, as if reality itself refuses to focus on it, and in its hand, it holds a camera. Thaddeus's camera. The video went viral, then vanished from the internet within hours, pulled by unknown authorities. The storm chaser claimed he received a visit from men in dark suits who said nothing, only handed him a sealed envelope and left. Inside was a single photograph, his own face, taken from inside his bedroom sometime during the night. No one believes him, but those who've studied the vanishing room know the truth. It doesn't just take people, it replaces them, and the ones who come back aren't really back at all. They're echoes. Echoes with instructions. Now consider this. When you walk through your home, do you count the doors? Do you notice if the hallway feels longer today than it did yesterday? Have you ever stood in a room and thought, just for a moment, that the walls leaned in slightly, as if listening? Because somewhere, deep in the heart of Ohio, a room waits. A room with no right to exist. A room that remembers every footstep, every breath, every name spoken within its walls. And if you listen closely, on the very edge of silence, you might hear it. Not a creak, not the wind, but a whisper, calling yours. The urban legend that locals swear is real and won't talk about at night. In the hollowed hills of northern West Virginia, where the trees grow thick and the valleys swallow sound like secrets never meant to be spoken, there's a stretch of road locals avoid after sundown. Not because it's dangerous in the usual way, no sharp curves, no history of accidents, but because something walks there, something that doesn't belong. The road is called Hollow Creek Lane, winding through the unincorporated township of Gormley Mills, a place so small it doesn't appear on most maps, and so quiet that even birds seem reluctant to sing past twilight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was late autumn in the year 1987 when the first official report came in, not to the sheriff's office, but whispered between neighbors over cracked porcelain cups of black coffee. A woman by the name of Thalia Mercer, who lived alone in a weather-worn clapboard house just off Hollow Creek Lane, claimed she saw a figure standing at the edge of her cornfield one evening. She said it wasn't tall, not exactly, but wrong its limbs too long, its head tilted at an angle that made her stomach twist. It didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood there, facing her porch, as if waiting for an invitation she had no intention of giving. Thalia was known in Gormley Mills as a practical woman church every Sunday, grew her own vegetables, kept a loaded 38 inches her nightstand since her husband passed in '69. So when she called Sheriff Harlan Voss 3 nights later, voice trembling like a plucked wire, he listened. He arrived with his flashlight cutting through the fog, boots crunching on frost-laced gravel. The house was dark except for a single lamp glowing behind the kitchen curtain. Thalia met him at the door, wrapped in a faded quilt, eyes wide and bloodshot. "It's back," she whispered. "Same spot, in the field." They walked together toward the edge of the property, the beam of the flashlight slicing through the mist. Nothing moved, no footprints in the damp soil, no snapped branches or disturbed earth. Just silence, thick and heavy, like wool pressed against the ears. Then, from somewhere deep in the corn rows, a sound. A low, wet clicking, like stones being rolled in oil. Sheriff Voss aimed the light, the stalks swayed slightly, though there was no wind, and then nothing. The sound stopped. The air stilled. They stood there for nearly 10 minutes, neither speaking, both feeling watched. Sheriff Voss told Thalia to stay indoors, lock the doors, and call him if anything changed. He drove away slowly, scanning the rearview mirror until the house disappeared behind the trees. He filed a report the next morning, possible hallucination due to stress or sleep deprivation, but privately he marked a note in his personal ledger, Hollow Creek, November 3rd, Thalia Mercer. Heard something, felt something, can't explain. That winter was harsh, long stretches of snow, power outages, roads blocked for days, but people in Gormley Mills noticed other things too. Dogs refused to go into backyards after dark. Chickens vanished without signs of struggle. And on still nights, when the moon hung low and yellow, some swore they heard voices calling from the woods, voices that didn't sound human. Children were kept inside after 6, porch lights stayed on all night, conversations about Hollow Creek Lane ended quickly, often with a shake of the head and a muttered phrase, "Best not talk about it." Then, in early spring of 1988, a teenager named Corwin Bellwether went missing. He was 16, lanky, with a stutter he'd been trying to overcome since childhood. Corwin liked to walk at night, said it helped him think. His mother, Elspeth, would beg him not to go down Hollow Creek Lane, but he always shrugged and said, "Nothing out there but trees and dirt." On the night of March 14th, he left after dinner with a notebook in his pocket, claiming he was writing poetry for school. He never came back. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Bloodhounds picked up his scent near the creek bed, then lost it abruptly, as if he'd stepped off the face of the earth. A week later, his boots were found placed neatly side by side at the base of an old sycamore, roots tangled like knuckles. No body, no blood, no explanation. The official cause of disappearance? Presumed runaway. But in Gormley Mills, folks knew better. They looked at each other in church pews, eyes shadowed, lips tight. They didn't say much. But they stopped walking that road entirely. Years passed, the story faded mostly. New families moved into the valley, drawn by cheap land and quiet living. They laughed at the old tales. Ghosts, they'd say. Come on. But then, little things started happening. Lights flickering in empty rooms, cold spots in hallways. One woman, Miriam Huxley, claimed she saw a figure in her bathroom mirror one night, a man with sunken eyes and a mouth sewn shut with black thread. She screamed, turned on the light, and it was gone. The next morning, she found a single muddy footprint on the linoleum leading from the bathtub to the door, but the windows were locked. The house had no basement access. In 2005, a documentary crew from Pittsburgh arrived, determined to debunk the myth. They set up cameras along Hollow Creek Lane, motion sensors, audio recorders. For 2 nights, nothing. On the 3rd, at precisely 2:13 in the morning, every device failed simultaneously. The footage showed only static, but audio captured a whisper, faint at first, then clearer. You're not supposed to see. When the lead technician reviewed the files, he noticed something else. In the background, beneath the static, a rhythmic tapping 3 slow knocks, pause, then 2 quick ones, like a code or a warning. He played it for an elderly resident named Otis Grindle, who'd lived in Gormley Mills his entire life. Otis listened once, turned pale, and said, "That's how they used to signal before the mine collapsed in '49. Only the men trapped underground knew that pattern." He refused to speak another word on the subject. By 2012, Hollow Creek Lane was officially closed. The county put up a rusted gate, chained and padlocked, with a sign that read, "Road closed. No trespassing." But kids still dared each other to go. Teens from nearby towns would drive up on weekends, flashlights in hand, laughing nervously as they approached the gate. Most turned back before reaching the tree line. But a few went further. One such group, in October of 2017, included a boy named Jory Linthwaite. He was 17, curious, raised on horror films and internet creepypastas. He didn't believe in ghosts, he believed in adrenaline. That night, he and 3 friends cut the chain with bolt cutters and slipped through. They brought cameras, a Ouija board, even a EVP recorder. They set up camp near the old sycamore where Corwin's boots were found. At first, it was jokes. Flashlight beams dancing through the trees, mocking whispers. Then, around 1 o'clock, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath came out in thick clouds. Their phones died, one by one. Then the recorder picked up a voice, clear, childlike, but distorted. Don't look behind you." All four spun around. Nothing there. But when they turned back, the Ouija board planchette had moved on its own, spelling "leave now." They packed up fast. As they ran toward the gate, Jory tripped. His friends thought he'd caught his foot on a root, but when they stopped and turned, Jory wasn't getting up. He was staring into the trees, mouth open, eyes wide with terror. "It's watching," he whispered. "It's smiling." They pulled him up, half dragging him the rest of the way. The chain was intact again, no sign it had ever been cut. Jory didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he described a face pale, stretched, with too many teeth. He said it stood between the trees, perfectly still, just smiling. And then, in a voice not his own, he said, "It knows my name." After that, the county welded the gate shut, installed surveillance cameras. Within a week, all 4 cameras malfunctioned. Footage showed nothing but snow, even though the night was clear. And in the corner of one frame, barely visible, a shadow tall, thin, with fingers too long to be real, reached slowly toward the lens. To this day, residents of Gormley Mills won't go near Hollow Creek Lane after dark. If you ask them why, they'll change the subject, or give you a look one that says, "You don't want to know." But if you visit in late autumn, when the leaves turn brittle and the wind carries the scent of damp earth and decay, stand at the edge of that road at dusk. Listen. Really listen. You might hear the faintest echo of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. You might feel the air thicken, your breath shorten, your skin prickle as if unseen eyes have settled on you. And if you're foolish enough to step past the gate, to walk just a few yards down that cracked asphalt path, you may notice something worse. The silence isn't empty. It's waiting. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the moon hides behind clouds and the world holds its breath, you can hear it breathe back. They say it mimics voices, calls out names in familiar tones, your mother's lullaby, your best friend's laugh, just to lure you deeper. But those who've heard it warn, don't answer, don't turn. Don't even think about looking back. Because once it has your attention, it never lets go. There's a reason the elders in Gormley Mills whisper prayers before bedtime, why parents check their children's windows twice, why on certain nights the entire town seems to go dark at once, as if hiding. It's not superstition, it's survival. And if you find yourself near Hollow Creek Lane when the clock strikes midnight, remember this. The stories aren't legends. They're warnings. And the thing in the woods? It remembers every person who didn't listen. Even now, in the hush between heartbeats, in the space where shadows grow longer than they should, something stirs. Not far, not loud, but close enough to hear you breathe. So tell me again, where are you listening from? And more importantly, are you alone? Missing 411, vanished in broad daylight 20 feet from family. On a crisp October afternoon in the year 1997, beneath a sky of pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud like torn lace, the small town of Pine Hollow, nestled in the rugged folds of northern Idaho, seemed untouched by urgency or fear. The air carried the faint scent of pine resin and damp earth, remnants of an early morning frost that had melted under the sun's gentle gaze. Children played near the edge of the woods behind their homes, their laughter echoing across open fields where goldenrod swayed in the breeze. It was one of those rare autumn days when time felt suspended, when even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? At precisely 3:28 in the afternoon on the 14th day of October, 1997, Elias Thornwood, a quiet boy of 9 years old, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hair so dark it almost swallowed the light, vanished without a sound. He wasn't taken from a dark alley, nor snatched during a thunderstorm, nor lured into the shadows by a stranger with hollow promises. No, he disappeared in broad daylight, just 20 feet from where his family stood, gathered in their backyard for a simple Sunday gathering. The Thornwoods lived in a modest 2-story cedar house at the end of Hemlock Lane, a gravel road fringed by towering pines and thick underbrush. Their property backed onto the dense expanse of the Bitterroot National Forest, where deer trails wound through ferns and fallen logs, and silence often pressed against the ears like cotton. That day, Elias's grandmother, Margaret, had come down from Missoula to visit, His father, Harlan, a mechanic with calloused hands and a voice like gravel rolling in a tin can, was grilling bratwurst over a charcoal fire. His mother, Lila, wore her favorite lavender apron and stirred a pot of apple cider spiced with cinnamon and cloves. His older sister, Cora, then 11, sat cross-legged on a patch of grass, braiding daisies into a crown while humming an old folk tune passed down from her great-aunt. Elias had been playing hide-and-seek with the neighbor's son, Joran Pike, a wiry boy with freckles scattered across his nose like pepper. They'd agreed on boundaries, the fence line, the old oak tree with the tire swing, and the edge of the woods, which both parents had strictly forbidden them from crossing. Not beyond the stump, Harlan had said earlier, pointing to a moss-covered log half buried in ivy. That forest doesn't forgive mistakes. It was just after 3 o'clock when Joran ducked behind the woodpile near the garage, giggling as Elias counted aloud, his back pressed against the cherry tree in the center of the yard. 10, 9, 8. His voice rang clear and bright. Birds chirped in the hedges. A dog barked somewhere down the lane. The world felt safe, predictable. When Elias reached 0, he turned, scanned the yard, and called out, "Ready or not?" He found Joran quickly, bursting from behind the logs with a triumphant whoop. Then came the next round. This time, Elias hid. He darted toward the far side of the yard, near the rusted garden shed where tomato vines curled around broken trellises. He crouched low, pressing himself into the shadow of the wall, heart thudding with excitement. The plan was simple. He would stay hidden until Joran gave up and called his name. But he never emerged. 3:28. That's when Cora first noticed. She looked up from her flower crown, squinting across the lawn. "Where's Elias?" She asked, her voice light at first, tinged only with mild curiosity. No one answered immediately. Harlan flipped a sausage with tongs. Lila poured cider into mugs. Margaret rocked gently in the folding chair, knitting needles clicking. "Elias?" Cora called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Joran frowned. "He was right here. I saw him go behind the shed." Harlan set the tongs down. "Elias, enough hiding now." Silence. Then, movement, a flicker of unease passing between the adults like a cold draft under a door. Lila wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the shed, her steps quickening. "Elias? Sweetheart, come out. Dinner's ready." She peered around the corner. Nothing. Just a scattering of fallen leaves and a single red sneaker lying on its side. Her breath caught. "Harlan?" Her voice cracked like dry wood. "He's not here." Within seconds, the peaceful backyard erupted into chaos. Harlan sprinted to the shed, circled it twice, then pushed through the tall grass toward the tree line. "Elias! Elias!" His shouts tore through the stillness, sharp and desperate. Joran began to cry. Cora stood frozen, clutching her unfinished daisy chain, her knuckles white. Margaret rose slowly, her knitting falling to the ground. "He wouldn't go into the woods," she whispered. "He knows better." But the truth was undeniable. The boundary line marked by the old stump had been crossed. A trail of crushed ferns and disturbed soil led directly into the trees. And then, abruptly, the trail ended, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Neighbors arrived within minutes. Sheriff Dale Mercer, a man with salt and pepper hair and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, arrived with 2 deputies and a German shepherd named Rex. Search teams fanned out through the forest, calling Elias's name, their flashlights cutting beams through the thinning light. Volunteers joined in local hunters, school teachers, even the postman, Mr. Havelock, who had delivered mail on Hemlock Lane for 32 years. They searched all night, they searched the next day, they dragged the creek behind the property, combed abandoned mining shafts half a mile east, checked every cabin and trailer within a 10-mile radius. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating the air like frantic wings. Nothing. No footprints beyond the initial trail, no clothing snagged on branches, no signs of struggle, no ransom note, no suspicious vehicles reported. Elias Thornwood had simply ceased to exist, 20 feet from the people who loved him most. The investigation stretched for months. FBI agents reviewed grainy security footage from a gas station 3 miles away useless. Psychics were consulted, though Sheriff Mercer rolled his eyes and called them noisemakers. Tips poured in, some credible, most not. A woman in Spokane claimed she saw a boy matching Elias's description boarding a Greyhound bus with a man in a brown coat. Another caller said he'd seen a van parked near the forest edge around 3:15 that day, engine running, windows tinted, but no license plate, no confirmation. And then, silence. Years passed. The missing posters yellowed and peeled from telephone poles, the search parties disbanded. The case file grew thick with dead ends and unanswered questions, eventually labeled inactive by the county office. Yet, the Thornwoods never stopped looking. Lila kept Elias's room exactly as it was, blue walls with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, a toy truck overturned on the rug, a book splayed open on the bed. Every birthday, she lit a candle. Every Christmas, she placed a present under the tree with his name on it. Harlan quit his job at the garage and spent weekends hiking deep into the bitterroots, carving markers into trees, whispering his son's name into the wind. Cora, once a carefree girl with wildflower crowns and scraped knees, grew into a woman haunted by memory. She studied forensic anthropology at the University of Montana, determined to understand how someone could vanish without a trace. She wrote letters to missing persons databases, compared Elias's case to others, especially those in national parks or remote areas. That's when she stumbled upon something unsettling. There were patterns. Boys, mostly between the ages of 8 and 12, disappeared near forests, often within sight of family, no evidence of abduction, no bodies ever recovered. Cases scattered across different states, Montana, Colorado, New Hampshire, West Virginia, but clustered strangely around protected wilderness areas, federal land, regions with limited surveillance. One researcher, David Paulides, had compiled dozens of these cases under a project he called Missing 411. When Cora read his work, her blood ran cold. Elias's disappearance fit the profile perfectly: daylight, proximity to family, sudden absence, lack of forensic evidence. Even the terrain matched: soft soil, dense canopy, poor cell reception. But why? What connected these children? Some theories surfaced: wild animals, though no claw marks, no remains; runaways, though none left notes or took belongings; foul play by strangers, yet no witnesses, no DNA. Others whispered about more troubling possibilities: coordinated abductions, underground networks, or something darker, something the official reports refused to acknowledge. Then came the rumors. Hunters in the Bitterroots spoke in hushed tones about figures seen deep in the woods, tall, unnaturally still, moving without sound. Old-timers recalled stories from native elders about the vanishing people, spirits said to dwell in the high timber, who took children who strayed too far. Some believed the forest itself had a consciousness, a hunger. Sheriff Mercer dismissed such talk. "Grief makes people see ghosts," he said once, leaning against his cruiser outside the diner on Main Street. Truth is, sometimes bad things happen for no reason, and sometimes we never get answers. But Cora couldn't accept that. In the spring of 2016, 17 years after Elias vanished, she returned to Pine Hollow with a team of researchers and a drone equipped with thermal imaging. They scanned the forest floor, focusing on the area just beyond the stump. On the third day, the drone detected an anomaly, a shallow depression in the earth, roughly the size of a child, partially concealed by roots and moss. Soil samples revealed traces of human decomposition, but DNA testing yielded inconclusive results. Too degraded, too old. Still, it was something. That night, Cora sat on the porch of the old house, now weathered and quiet, rocking in her grandmother's chair. The stars blinked above, cold and distant. A breeze stirred the pines, whispering through the needles like voices just below hearing. And then, faintly, she heard it. A giggle, high-pitched, familiar. It came from the edge of the woods. She stood, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the darkness. "Elias?" she whispered. No answer, only the wind. But the next morning, nestled among the roots of the old oak, they found it a small wooden horse, hand-carved, one ear chipped. It had belonged to Elias. He'd carried it everywhere. It was gone the day he disappeared. Now it was back. No fingerprints, no footprints, just the toy, resting on a bed of pine cones as if placed there with care. The local news picked up the story briefly. Ghostly return read one headline. Mystery deepens in cold case, said another. But soon, attention faded. Life moved on. Except for Cora. She now lives in Pine Hollow year-round, working from a home office filled with maps, photographs, and binders labeled Project Echo, her personal archive dedicated to unresolved disappearances. She gives lectures at universities, appears on podcasts, urges families to speak up, to question, to remember, and every October 14th at precisely 3:28 in the afternoon, she walks to the edge of the woods, stands at the moss-covered stump, and calls her brother's name. Sometimes, she says, the wind answers. Other times, the silence is unbearable. But she continues, because as long as one person remembers, Elias Thornwood is not truly gone. And perhaps, just perhaps, he is waiting. Waiting for someone to finally listen. To finally look not just outward into the trees, but inward into the spaces between memory and myth, where truth sometimes hides in plain sight. Like a child behind a garden shed, smiling, counting down until someone finds him, or until the forest takes another.
The stories. Why these ranger station receipts still don't add up. In the fall of 2016, a set of receipts found at a remote ranger station raised more questions than answers. The station sat near a state forest in northern Oregon, surrounded by tall fir trees and steep dirt trails. It was used mostly during summer fire patrols, but in October it was supposed to be empty. Yet someone had been there recently enough to leave coffee stains on the counter and fresh tire tracks outside. The main caretaker that year was a 41-year-old ranger named Ellis Grady. He had worked for the state forestry department for over a decade and was known for being organized. When Ellis went missing for 2 days in early November, his coworkers assumed his truck had broken down on the backroads again. He returned quietly that Wednesday morning, pale and distracted, claiming he had been checking fire cameras deeper in the valley. But when the office assistant filed his expense paperwork, she noticed something strange about his fuel receipts. The dates and amounts didn't match the department's card records. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? At first, no one paid much attention. Rangers often paid for fuel out of pocket and turned in the slips later. But the accounting team flagged the entries because they came from a gas station nearly 70 miles off his assigned patrol route. The receipts were time-stamped 2 nights before he returned, right around the time he was unreachable by radio. The manager called him in for a short meeting, but Ellis brushed it off, saying he must have grabbed the wrong slips. Then he went back to work like nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, the night duty ranger stopped at the same outpost and noticed the door unlocked. Inside, lights were on, and someone had clearly been there. Coffee was still warm in the mug, and a jacket hung on the hook near the door. A few papers sat on the counter, pinned under a half-eaten granola bar. When the ranger flipped one over, he saw a receipt from the same station near the coast, dated that very day. It had Ellis's signature at the bottom. When questioned again, Ellis looked shaken. He admitted he had been there that morning, but claimed he just liked driving the scenic route to clear his head. His supervisor didn't find that convincing. The ranger station wasn't even close to the coastal highway. The dirt road leading there was partially blocked by fallen branches from the last storm, and no patrol had been assigned west of the ridge in weeks. Later, one of the younger rangers named Lydia found Ellis's old logbook. Inside, the last few pages were torn out. The remaining entries mentioned several trips out to check Tower 17, a decommissioned lookout on a ridge above an old mining road. That tower had been boarded up for years after a small landslide shifted the foundation. Nobody was supposed to go near it, but the receipts, when mapped, showed a pattern leading right in that direction. In December, a state audit began. Investigators collected the receipts and compared timestamps with the department's truck GPS logs. The logs confirmed that Ellis's vehicle had gone off-route 3 times in late October. Each time, he stayed parked in the same area for several hours. No maintenance work or inspections had been scheduled there. When the auditors interviewed Ellis, he denied staying overnight and insisted the logs were inaccurate. Still, his supervisor noticed the smell of mildew and campfire smoke on his jacket, as if he had been sleeping outdoors. A retired ranger named Hal, who used to work those trails, came forward after hearing rumors. He told the auditors that Tower 17 wasn't completely empty. Inside the storage room below the lookout floor, there were boxes of old survey records and equipment, some of which had been used decades earlier to mark water boundaries. He said if anyone wanted to hide something out there, it would go unnoticed for months. That prompted a small search. 2 rangers and a deputy hiked up to the ridge on a mild January morning. They found tire tracks that matched the department vehicle and a flattened patch of grass behind the tower. Inside, they found the storage boxes Hal mentioned. Most were filled with faded maps and water samples sealed in glass jars. But under one box was a torn envelope containing several small gas receipts folded together. Each had Ellis's handwriting and the same coastal gas station stamp. When Ellis was told about this discovery, he reportedly said, "Then someone's messing with me." He claimed he had never been inside that tower and suggested maybe someone else had used his name. But handwriting experts later confirmed that the signatures were consistent with his previous expense forms. It wasn't conclusive evidence of wrongdoing, but it didn't make sense either. The total fuel listed on those receipts was more than his truck could even hold. The Forest Department quietly placed Ellis on leave while they continued looking into what he was doing on those off-route trips. They interviewed people from nearby towns, asking if anyone had seen a white government pickup in late October. A mechanic from a service station 20 miles south recalled a man in a ranger uniform buying fuel from a portable drum around that time. He couldn't be sure it was Ellis, but he remembered the guy paid cash and seemed in a hurry. By early spring, the case went cold. The department moved on, Ellis resigned, and the receipts were boxed up with the rest of the audit files. But in 2019, a new ranger named Theo discovered something while clearing out the same outpost. He found a metal coffee tin hidden behind a loose board under the counter. Inside were several folded papers, damp but legible. They were fuel receipts again, all from that same coastal station. The latest date was November 3rd, 2016, the night Ellis had gone missing. Each receipt had strange notes scribbled on the back. One read, "No radio past ridge." Another said, "3 lights south of tower." The handwriting matched Ellis's older logs. The department contacted him again, but he refused to comment. A few weeks later, he reportedly moved to Montana and stopped responding to emails. Since then, the receipts have been filed in the regional archive. Some employees still talk about the case, mostly as a cautionary tale. Every few years, new staff find copies during routine checks and bring them up again, wondering what he was doing out there. The gas station itself closed down in 2017, so no new records could be verified. The old cashier who worked there remembered a quiet man in uniform coming in several times that fall, always after midnight, always buying coffee and fuel, never talking much. No criminal charges were ever filed. The department concluded there wasn't enough evidence to prove misconduct, only inconsistencies in the paperwork. Yet to this day, those ranger station receipts still don't add up. Some say Ellis was running a side job with off-book fuel sales. Others think he was covering up something that happened near that old tower. But whatever the truth was, it remains buried somewhere in the hills beyond the ridge, where the radios still go silent and the trail signs fade away each winter.
They found a shipwreck, but it wasn't supposed to exist. It was late autumn in the year 1957 when a group of marine surveyors working off the coast of Maine stumbled upon something that defied every known record, something buried beneath layers of silt and kelp cradled by the cold Atlantic floor. The vessel, partially collapsed but unmistakably intact in sections, lay at a depth of nearly 200 feet just beyond the continental shelf near Monhegan Island. What made the discovery so unnerving wasn't merely its condition, it was the design. The hull bore no resemblance to any documented ship from the colonial era, nor did it match the blueprints of early American fishing vessels or merchant schooners. Its structure was sleek, almost futuristic for its time, with riveted plating arranged in an unusual spiral pattern and portholes shaped like ovals rather than circles. Most peculiar of all, there were no markings, no name, no registry number, nothing to suggest where it came from or who had sailed her. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The team, led by Silas Thorne, a wiry, weather-beaten oceanographer with salt-crusted boots and a permanent squint from years spent scanning horizons, had been mapping the seabed for potential oil deposits when their sonar picked up an anomaly. At first, they assumed it was a submerged rock formation, perhaps an ancient glacial deposit left behind by retreating ice sheets. But as the remote-operated camera descended through the murky water, the image on the monitor shifted from shadow to shape and then, suddenly, into undeniable form. A ship. Not just any ship, but one that looked as though it had been placed there deliberately, like a secret meant to stay hidden. Silas leaned forward in his chair aboard the research vessel Auriga, his breath catching in his throat. "Back it up," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Just a few feet, let's get a wider angle." The technician obeyed, guiding the submersible drone backward. And there, illuminated in the beam of its spotlight, the full silhouette emerged long, narrow, with a prow that curved upward like the beak of some prehistoric bird. No sails, no smokestacks. Just smooth metal, stained green with corrosion, yet still holding its shape after decades, perhaps centuries, beneath the waves. "What in God's name?" murmured Elric Foss, the expedition's lead historian, a man whose knowledge of maritime archaeology spanned 3 continents. He adjusted his glasses, peering at the screen as if trying to decipher a dream. "That isn't 18th century. Not even close. Look at the bow. There's no reinforcement for ramming, no figurehead mount. This isn't built for wind, it's built for speed." The date was November 12th, 1957. The sky above the Auriga was overcast, heavy with the promise of winter storms. Waves slapped against the hull with a steady rhythm, and the air smelled of brine and diesel. Inside the cramped control cabin, tension hummed like a live wire. Every eye was fixed on the monitor, every breath seemed too loud. They sent the drone closer, the camera swept across the deck, or what remained of it. Hatches were sealed shut, fused by time and pressure. One side of the ship had caved inward, likely from implosion or collision, but the other remained surprisingly intact. Then, as the light passed over a recessed panel near the stern, something glinted. Not metal, glass, crystal. The technician zoomed in. Embedded in the hull was a circular window, thick, convex, and darkened with age, but behind it, faintly, something shimmered. A reflection. Or perhaps movement? "No," Elric whispered. "That's impossible. Could be sediment shifting," someone offered, though their voice wavered. Silas didn't respond. He stared, unblinking. Because for a fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, he thought he saw a shape pass behind the glass. A silhouette. Human? Not quite. Too tall. Too still. They pulled the drone back immediately. Protocol demanded caution. Unknown wrecks could be unstable, even dangerous. But curiosity, once ignited, is not easily quenched. That night, aboard the Auriga, the crew gathered in the mess hall, steaming mugs in hand, voices hushed, logs were reviewed, charts studied. No vessel matching the description had ever been reported missing in those waters, no distress calls, no sightings, nothing. And yet, there it was. Over the next 3 days, they launched 2 more dives. Each time, the images grew clearer. Inside the ship, via a breached section near the midship, the camera revealed corridors narrow, sloping downward at a slight incline, lined with smooth walls that looked almost molded, not welded. There were no ladders, no handrails. Instead, shallow grooves ran along the floor, as if designed for bare feet or something else entirely. Instruments mounted on the walls resembled dials, but their markings were alien circles within triangles, symbols that bore no relation to any known language. One device, partially intact, emitted a faint hum when the drone's light touched it, a vibration so low it was felt more than heard, resonating through the submersible's frame. Elric spent hours comparing the findings to classified naval projects, Cold War prototypes, even rumored Soviet stealth crafts. Nothing fit. The materials alone, alloys later identified as a titanium-zirconium composite, were not in use until the 1980s. How had such a ship ended up at the bottom of the Atlantic in what appeared to be a state of preservation far exceeding its age? Then came the photograph. On the 4th dive, the drone captured an image inside what might have been a control room. In the center stood a pedestal topped with a translucent sphere, cracked but still glowing with a soft internal light blue, pulsing faintly like a slow heartbeat. Around it, 6 seats were arranged in a semicircle, each molded to the shape of a body, but not a human body. The limbs were elongated, the spine curved unnaturally, the headrests were too large, too high. Silas refused to believe it. It's erosion, he insisted. Water distortion, trick of the light. But Elric knew better. He had seen cave paintings in France that depicted beings with stars for eyes. He had read declassified documents about Project Sign, about pilots who spoke of disc-shaped objects over New Mexico in 1947. This was different. This was physical, tangible, buried, yes, but waiting. The decision was made to bring up a sample. A small fragment of the hull, carefully extracted using hydraulic cutters. It was placed in a sealed container, stored in the ship's lab. That night, the temperature aboard the Auriga dropped without explanation. Crewmen reported hearing whispers in the ventilation shafts, soft, rhythmic, not in any language they recognized. One sailor, Jorvik Menet, swore he saw a reflection in the porthole of his cabin, not his own, but a face, long and pale, watching him from the dark water outside. By morning, the fragment was gone. Not stolen, not misplaced, vanished. The container was intact, locked, undamaged, but inside, empty. Only a fine dust remained, clinging to the sides like ash. Panic began to spread. The captain ordered the mission aborted. They would return to port, file a report with the Navy, and let others decide what to do. But as the Auriga turned east toward Rockland Harbor, the sonar pinged again, this time not from below, but from behind. Something was rising from the wreck, slowly, deliberately. Silas rushed to the deck. The sea was calm, the sky breaking into pale streaks of dawn, but beneath the surface, a disturbance formed a column of bubbles, spiraling upward like a vortex. And then, for just a moment, the water shimmered, as if refracting light from an unseen source. A low tone echoed through the hull, deep and resonant, vibrating the bones of everyone on board. No one spoke, no one moved, and then, silence. When they reached shore, the official report cited equipment malfunction, sonar misinterpretation, and possible geological activity. The footage was classified, the logs were sealed, the crew dispersed, some transferred, others retiring abruptly. Silas Thorne submitted a detailed addendum, only to have it returned with a single sentence stamped across the cover. Information not consistent with established records. He never spoke of it again, not publicly, but in the attic of his cottage in Boothbay Harbor, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, he kept a notebook. Pages filled with sketches, coordinates, and one haunting phrase repeated over and over, as if trying to convince himself it wasn't supposed to be there, it wasn't supposed to exist. Years passed. The story faded into rumor told in hushed tones at coastal bars, scribbled in the margins of obscure journals. Some claimed the wreck resurfaced during a storm in 1973, seen by lobstermen off Matnicus Isle. Others said the Navy recovered it in secret, towing it under cover of fog to a facility in Portsmouth. A few even believed the ship was never human at all, that it had arrived from somewhere else, crash landing in the ocean long before history began recording names and dates. Elric Voss, in his final interview before passing in 2004, was asked if he thought the truth would ever come out. He paused, then smiled faintly. "Truth?" he said. "Sometimes the truth isn't something you find, it's something that finds you. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the cold rolling waves off the coast of Maine, it's still waiting. The sea keeps its secrets well. But not forever. Because even now, on quiet nights when the wind dies down and the stars hang low over the water, fishermen swear they hear it, a faint pulse rising from the deep, a rhythm, a signal, as if something down there is waking up. This desert town exists to hide something. The night siren proves it. The sun had long since collapsed behind the jagged teeth of the Sierra Lamitas, painting the sky in bruised purples and fading oranges, when Elias Thorne first stepped onto the cracked asphalt of Drywater Junction. The air hung thick with dust and silence so deep it pressed against the eardrums like cotton soaked in oil. No crickets, no wind, not even the distant hum of a generator broke the stillness. Just the soft crunch of Elias's boots on gravel and the slow creak of a rusted sign above him that read, "Welcome to Drywater Population 17." That number, he would later learn, was not quite accurate and never had been. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was late September in the year 1997 when Elias arrived, a geologist contracted by the Bureau of Land Management to assess subsurface erosion patterns near the Mojave Fringe. He wasn't supposed to stay longer than 3 days. But Drywater had other plans. The town clung to the edge of the desert like a scab, refusing to heal wooden shacks leaning at odd angles, their windows boarded or shattered, paint peeled into ghostly curls. A single gas station stood open, its fluorescent light flickering like a dying heartbeat. Behind the counter sat a man named Orrin Vexley, gaunt as a scarecrow, eyes milky with cataracts that didn't quite hide the sharpness beneath. He handed Elias a room key without asking for ID, without smiling, and said only, "Don't go out after sundown, especially if you hear the siren." "I think the same." Elias laughed, then nervously, more out of discomfort than disbelief. "Siren? Like an air raid?" Orrin didn't blink, "Like nothing you've heard, and once you do, it stays with you, in your bones." That night, Elias lay on a lumpy cot in room 4 of the Dustvale Motel, the ceiling fan turning with a lazy metallic groan. Outside, the moon hung low and yellow, casting long shadows that seemed too tall, too thin to belong to any natural object. He'd just closed his eyes when it came a sound so unnatural it froze the breath in his lungs. It began faintly, like whine through a canyon, but quickly swelled into a high-pitched wail, melodic yet dissonant, rising and falling in intervals that defied human tuning. It wasn't electronic. It wasn't animal. It carried weight, like something ancient being dragged across stone. The siren pulsed through the walls, vibrating the glass in the window, making the metal bedframe hum. And beneath it, almost imperceptible, were voices whispering, overlapping, speaking in no language Elias recognized, yet somehow understood in flashes. "They watch from below," one seemed to say. The hollow ones, remember. He bolted upright, heart hammering, sweat slick on his neck. He reached for the lamp, knocking over a glass of water. The siren stopped instantly. Silence crashed back like a slammed door. No birds, no footsteps, nothing. He waited nearly an hour before daring to peer outside. The street was empty, but in the dirt beside the motel's foundation, something caught his eye: footprints. Small, barefoot, too narrow to be human. They led from the edge of the lot toward the dry riverbed, vanishing where the sand turned black and glassy, as if scorched by fire. The next morning, Elias tried to ask about the siren at the diner, the Rust Spoon, a dim place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. A woman named Merelda Cray sat nursing a cup, her hair pulled back so tightly it made her cheekbones look like knife edges. She looked up when Elias mentioned the sound. "You heard it," she said flatly, not a question. "I did. What is it? Some kind of test? Military?" Merelda set her spoon down with a click. "The siren calls them, brings them closer. We used to have a curfew during the war, World War II, 1943, when the army came through. Built something underground, said it was radar, but the siren started then. First time, then stopped for years, came back in 1978, again in 1989. And now it sings every few nights." Elias frowned. "Who built it?" She leaned forward, voice dropping. "Not who, what? They weren't soldiers, not all of them. Some wore uniforms, yes, but others moved wrong. Too smooth, too quiet. One of them, he had no shadow." Elias wanted to dismiss her as paranoid, superstitious, but the footprints, the silence, the way the townspeople avoided certain streets after dark. And Orrin, when questioned, simply muttered, "We keep the lights off, we don't answer doors, and we never ever whistle at night." Curiosity became obsession. Over the next week, Elias combed through the county archives in nearby Blythe, though most records from the mid-20th century were missing or burned. What he found instead were fragments, a classified project codenamed Operation Hollow Veil, referenced in a declassified memo from the Department of Defense dated March of 1944. Mentioned briefly, acoustic resonance experiments conducted in isolated zones intended to disrupt enemy signal propagation, but the location was redacted. Only a grid coordinate remained, plotted directly beneath Drywater Junction. He returned with a ground-penetrating radar unit borrowed under false pretenses. Working under cover of darkness, he scanned the area near the old rail spur, half a mile east of town. At a depth of 230 feet, the machine picked up a vast hollow chamber circular, approximately 300 yards in diameter. And inside, intermittent pulses of energy, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Then, on the seventh night, the siren returned, louder than before. This time, Elias was ready. He recorded it on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind used for field seismology. As the sound poured from the speakers in his motel room, slowed to half speed, the whispers emerged clearer. Not words, more like impressions, layered beneath the tone. "We sleep beneath the salt," one seemed to convey. "The door must not open. The watcher is blind, but listens." And then, just before the tape ended, a child's voice, soft, trembling, said, "Daddy, why won't the stars come back?" Elias sat frozen, because that voice, he knew it. His own daughter, Lyra, had spoken those exact words the night before she died in a car accident 2 years prior, words never recorded, never shared with anyone. How could a desert town in California know that? He confronted Oren the next day, waving the tape. "What is this place? What are you hiding?" Oren stared at the device, then slowly reached under the counter. He placed a small object on the glass, a rusted metal disc, etched with symbols that looked neither human nor machine-made. Angular. Flowing. Alive. "This was found in the shaft," Oren said. 1951. By a miner named Heston Pike. He went mad within a week. Spent his last days scratching equations on his cell walls. Said the siren wasn't a warning, it was a lullaby, meant to keep something asleep. Elias's hands trembled. Asleep? Oren nodded. Underground. Beneath the old test site. The government thought they were building a bunker, but they weren't digging down, they were uncovering something that was already there. Long before us. Long before anything. And the siren? Elias whispered. It sings to it, calms it. When the power fails, or when someone like you pokes too hard, the song fades, and it stirs. That night, the electricity cut out across Drywater. No explanation, no surge, just darkness. Elias stood at his window, watching. Every house was dark, except one. A small cottage at the edge of town, its porch light blinking in a pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code? SOS. But no one went to help. Instead, doors locked, windows shuttered, and from somewhere far below, a deep subsonic rumble began, felt more than heard, like the earth itself grinding its teeth. Then, faint at first, the siren rose again, this time not from the town, but from beneath it. And this time, it wasn't singing to keep something asleep. It was screaming because it had woken up. Elias grabbed his gear and ran for his truck. But as he turned the key, the engine wouldn't catch. Again. Again. Nothing. He looked up and froze. Standing in the middle of the road, silhouetted by the pale moon, was a figure. Tall. Thin. Limbs too long, moving with a jerking grace, like a puppet tested by invisible strings. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, until it faced him. No face, just smooth skin, stretched tight. And from its chest, where a heart should be the siren's melody, pulsed outward, vibrating the air, distorting the light. Elias stumbled back, falling against the truck. He fumbled for the tape recorder, pressed play. His daughter's voice echoed into the night. "Daddy, why won't the stars come back?" The figure paused. Then, in a voice that was not a voice, more like dozens of whispers threaded through metal, it replied, "Because we ate them." Elias didn't scream. He couldn't. His throat sealed shut, his lungs locked. The thing stepped forward, each movement accompanied by a soft chime, like glass bells underwater. But then, faint at first, a new sound joined the chorus. From the gas station, Oren had climbed onto the roof. In his hands, a battered horn, an old railroad signal, rusted and dented. He blew into it with all his strength. A deep, mournful note rolled across the desert. The figure stopped, turned. Another blast, and another. From other houses, lights flickered on, not electric oil lamps, candles. People emerged, carrying instruments, tin whistles, hand drums, a warped violin. They formed a circle around the edge of town and began to play not music, but a complex sequence of tones rising and falling in precise patterns. The siren from beneath the earth faltered. The figure twitched, then slowly, painfully sank to its knees. Its form blurred like heat over asphalt and then collapsed into a pile of fine gray ash. Silence returned. But not peace. Oren approached Elias, breathing heavily, the horn dangling from his fingers. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "Now it knows your voice, knows your grief. It'll call to you again. In dreams, in static, in the silence between radio stations." Elias swallowed. "What was that thing?" "A scout," Oren said. "A listener, sent ahead. If the song stops for too long, they send more, and if the song dies completely, he didn't finish." "What happens?" Oren looked toward the horizon, where the first hint of dawn stained the sky blood red. "The sky goes dark, not at night, forever, and the ones below climb up." Elias left Drywater the next morning. Officially, he filed a report citing geological instability and abandoned infrastructure. Unofficially, he destroyed the tapes, except one. The one with his daughter's voice. He kept that buried in a safe behind a false wall in his Denver apartment. But sometimes, on still nights when the power blinks, he hears it, a faint, melodic wail, coming not from outside, but from within the walls. And when he presses his ear to the plaster, he doesn't hear the siren. He hears knocking. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. Then a whisper. "Let us sing you to sleep." To this day, no satellite imagery shows Drywater Junction clearly. Clouds always seem to gather above it, even in drought. GPS signals fail within a 5-mile radius. And travelers who claim to have passed through often cannot recall the name of the town, only the silence, only the feeling of being watched from below. And if you drive through the Mojave after midnight and your radio begins to crackle with a strange, haunting tone, do not stop, do not listen, do not answer if something calls your name in a voice you once loved. Because some towns exist not to welcome, but to warn. And Drywater is still singing.
The stories. This abandoned cabin blueprint exposed a secret crawlspace. The cabin looked ordinary in photos, yet the archived blueprint flagged one space that did not exist on site. Local records listed a 1-bedroom layout, but the drawing showed a narrow service void marked beneath the living room. Silas Bergen was 36, and he worked as a county compliance inspector who handled delinquent properties before auction. He drove out on a gray weekday to walk the structure, photograph hazards, and confirm that the layout matched the file. The place sat off a 2-lane road that wound through pines with a creek down behind the lot. The roofline sagged over a porch stripped of rails, and the windows held plastic sheeting taped from the inside. He unlocked the door with a temporary code from asset management, and he called out to clear the space. The air smelled like wet wood and dust, and a fleck of ash drifted when he stepped on a warped plank. His plan was simple: walk clockwise and document each room, then compare notes to the blueprint. He had a body cam that synced to a phone, and he kept a paper checklist clipped to a thin clipboard. The front room matched the drawing in size, yet the joists underneath felt different when he tapped the floor. The sound was dull near the hearth, then strangely hollow near the wall that faced the porch. He paused and studied the print, which carried a date stamp from 1996 and a contractor name. The sheet showed a 6-foot by 3-foot chase for ducting, labeled unfinished, with access from a panel. There was no panel visible, and there were no vents large enough to match the dimensions. He measured along the baseboard with a tape, then marked the chalk line where the void should begin. Silas had done 100 inspections, and he knew when a wall tried to hide something. He set a small level against the trim, then noticed the paint edge looked newer than the room around it. He kept going through the kitchen, where a backed-up sink had left a ring around the basin. A calendar on the wall had pages stuck together, all from 2002, with a fishing cartoon printed on top. He took photos of the wiring, which showed cloth wrap at the outlets, and a modern breaker added later. The breaker ran a separate conduit along the sill, then vanished behind the same living room wall. That mismatch bothered him, so he called the records clerk who had pulled the blueprint the day before. She was retired, but still contracted hourly, and she said the sheet came from a permit request that was never finalized. She added one strange footnote from the parcel folder, which she read out in a careful voice. A handwritten note stated that a neighboring caller reported periodic hammering at night, then sudden silence before daybreak. Silas thanked her, then he checked the porch wall again, and he laid on the floor to sight the baseboard. A thin seam ran under the lowest plank, and a pothook sat on the floor beside the hearth bricks. He tugged the hook, and nothing moved, but the plank next to it shifted slightly when he leaned. He slipped a pry bar under the edge and felt the hidden nail heads give a little under pressure. He stopped and photographed everything, then he made a note to treat the space like a confined area. He lifted the plank a few inches, and the smell from below was cool and mineral like a cellar after rain. A rectangular cavity dropped 4 feet, then leveled into a crawl space that ran along the living room footprint. The sides were lined with old plywood, and someone had stapled foil-faced insulation in a patchwork grid. He climbed down with gloves, then took a careful crawl on elbows while the body cam light cut the darkness. Dust turned to packed silt, and the foil rustled against his jacket whenever his shoulder grazed the wall. 5 feet in, the crawl space opened into a small wedge where 2 joists had been doubled. A wire ran across the wedge and disappeared through a hole toward the porch, wrapped in black electrical tape. He traced the wire with a finger, then backed out and stepped onto the porch to search for the exit. The wire emerged under the porch bench, fed into a steel box, and terminated at what looked like a switch. The switch was taped into the off position, and the tape had a date written on it, 2005. Next to the switch, a second small box sat empty, with screw marks around a rectangle that once held something. He documented both boxes, then returned to the living room and eased into the void again. The path hooked left and began to slope down, as if someone had carved a shallow ramp under the wall. At the bottom of the ramp, he found a round hole cut cleanly through a concrete footing. The edge had been brushed with some kind of sealant, and faint black scuffs ran along the rim like scrape marks. He slid his phone through the hole and snapped a burst of shots while the flash bounced off damp earth. The images showed a low chamber beyond, supported by sandbags, with a lattice of pallets stacked into a platform. He measured the diameter of the hole with the tape, then radioed his office line to note the confined entry. He did not squeeze through, but he reached his arm further and felt air moving from the chamber. That air smelled like creek water and old leaves, which suggested a connection to the drainage cut behind the lot. He crawled out and circled the property line until he reached the bank where the creek curved north. There, he found a culvert from the road ditch that emptied toward the creek, with riprap hiding several small cavities. One cavity had a plywood face painted to match the stones, and the bottom edge hung loose in the mud. Silas lifted the panel and saw the pallet lattice that matched his phone photos from the interior side. It formed a short tunnel that led back toward the footing hole, shielded from view by the stones and brush. He photographed the culvert from the roadside, then returned to the porch and sat on the step to think. The blueprint had shown a void, and here it was, but the finishing work suggested someone had expanded it well beyond code. Before he called anyone, he walked next door to the only occupied house, a retired welder named Arlen Pike. Arlen was 70, and he looked careful the way men do after years of measuring metal with their eyes. Arlen said the cabin had belonged to a seasonal caretaker who used to plow the track in winter. He remembered hearing light clanking late on some nights, like tools hitting pipe, then a truck idling near the turnout. Silas asked if anyone had lived there after the caretaker left, and Arlen shook his head. He said the place sat empty for years, then one spring, the porch got new paint, and then the power went off again. Arlen added that the road had seen a string of petty thefts around 2005, according to a local newsletter. Coolers, gas cans, and toolboxes disappeared from pickups at the turnout while people hiked the trail. Back inside, Silas opened the kitchen drawer that held mailers, and he found a utility notice dated 2005. The notice warned of irregular off-peak usage, with spikes overnight that did not fit seasonal patterns. He called the utility office and asked for the archived meter notes, which a supervisor read while on speaker. The notes recorded low daytime load, then narrow spikes around midnight, and a flag that led to a field check. According to the supervisor, the field tech reported the panel was locked, yet an extra breaker ran to an unknown device. The tech noted a switch near the porch that controlled a separate line, which the owner had taped off. Silas thanked them and returned to the crawlspace, then placed a small magnet near the taped switch. The switch held power after the breaker, so the taped position likely disabled the line that fed the tunnel area. He considered why someone would build a clean conduit between a culvert and a living room. It could be smuggling, or a shady storm shelter, or a quiet way to enter and exit without a porch light turning on. He called the records clerk again and asked if the blueprint contractor had ever filed completion documents. She said the contractor died in 2004 and no one else filed amendments, which left the void uninspected. Silas pulled county incident logs from a public terminal at the office, then filtered for the turnout mile marker. Several entries from 2003 to 2005 mentioned car break-ins during trail hours. One dispatcher note mentioned a caller who thought someone moved under the road's surface near the culvert stones. The caller said the stones rattled like a grate being shifted, then a flashlight beam flickered out toward the creek. Silas visited the small volunteer station where a retired dispatcher still came in to organize training materials. She remembered a prank call trend that year, but she also remembered one credible tip from a hiker who left a name. The hiker, whose name he will not repeat, reported hearing a handheld scanner from inside the culvert during a busy weekend. The voice read license plates quietly, then said clear when a driver left a truck unlocked near the turnout. Back at the cabin, Silas checked the crawl again, and this time he saw faint letters printed on the foil facing. The letters matched a brand of insulated soundboard used in rehearsal rooms to dampen noise without thick walls. He scanned the chamber beyond the footing hole one more time and noticed zip tie heads gleaming along the pallet edges. The ties secured a cable run that likely held a small camera at culvert height aimed at the turnout path. He followed the cable to a break near the pallet mouth where critters had chewed through and left frayed copper. There, he also found a torn plastic sleeve that once held memory cards stuck in the silt beside the beam. Silas collected nothing, but he documented every detail from 4 angles, then filed a report that afternoon. The report asked for a confined space entry team to clear the chamber, then to photograph any equipment left inside. The team scheduled for the next morning, and Silas returned to watch them work while he stood above the crawl. They suited up with masks, slid in carefully, and passed up 4 items, all tagged and bagged for inventory. The items included a small VHF scanner, a smashed action camera, a handwritten log, and a lock with a cut shackle. The log listed dates, truck descriptions, and short notes like cooler, gas can, or tool chest, all marked with times. At the bottom of the log, a few lines mentioned a code word he had heard on the dispatcher note. The writer kept track of the word clear after reading a plate quietly, which matched the hiker account from that season. Silas wrote an addendum that evening that tied the blueprint to the crawlspace and the culvert method. He mapped the route from turnout to pallet chamber, then to the footing hole and the living room lift point. It was crude, yet it was efficient for someone who needed to vanish when headlights turned down the road. A person could slip under the riprap, cut the feed with the switch, stash gear, then rise through the floor and wait out patrols. 2 weeks later, the county closed the chamber with concrete, and asset management stripped the porch to studs. No charges appear in public record related to the log, which suggests the writer was either gone or unidentifiable. Arlen watched the work from his fence and said it explained the trucks that idled without drivers toward midnight. He said he had chalked it up to fishermen, but the old culvert trick made more sense when joined to the blueprint. Silas requested the utility to send him a copy of their night spike graph for his file notes. The graph showed narrow peaks around midnight, which matched the switch relay cycling, while equipment ran briefly under the floor. Years later, people still hike that turnout, and most know nothing about the pallet chamber under the stones. The cabin has new owners who kept the footprint, yet they asked the county to certify the slab as filled and sealed. The story holds because the file trail fits together and the parts line up with patient logic rather than thrill. A retired dispatcher kept the hand note that matched the log, and a utility supervisor verified the meter pattern. Silas keeps a copy of the 1996 blueprint in a drawer, with the void circled and dated in fresh ink. He says the strangest things in his job are the simplest, like a floor that sounds wrong when you tap it carefully. He never found a name to attach to the log, and there was no need to guess beyond the evidence. It took a thrift store scanner, a pallet stack, and a switch by a porch bench to run a silent route. The blueprint did not expose a treasure, and there was no buried room filled with cash, which makes it credible. It revealed a crawl space that served as a passage, built after a contractor died, and used for quick escapes. If anyone asks why the story stayed quiet, the answer is practical, and it does not involve secrecy or fear. The chamber is sealed, the turnout is patrolled, and the lesson remains written on a sheet that outlived its builder. He still taps floors on inspections and listens for that hollow change that means someone altered a plan. Most houses tell on themselves if you let them, and a blueprint can whisper where a person once chose to hide.